The orc woman stood at the edge of Quentin Kershaw's wheat field at dawn, completely naked except for the blood crusted across her green skin. And when his eyes met hers across 50 yards of morning mist, she did not flinch or cover herself. She simply waited to see if he would turn away like every other human who had ever looked upon her kind. Quentin had been walking his property line with a wooden bucket in one hand and a sickle in the other, preparing for another day of autumn harvest work, when movement caught his attention near the tree line. His first instinct was to run, to grab his old militia crossbow from the barn and barricade himself inside his farmhouse. Orcs meant raids, meant burning crops and stolen livestock, meant violence that frontier farmers like himself were barely equipped to survive. But this orc was alone, and she was not moving toward him with any weapon drawn. She was simply standing there, swaying slightly, one hand pressed to her side where dark blood seeped between her thick fingers. He should have run. Every ounce of common sense told him to get help from the village 3 miles south, to alert the territorial guard, to do anything except approach an orc who had appeared on his land. But Quentin had been a field medic during the border wars before he retired to farm, and he recognized the stance of someone who was using every last bit of strength just to remain upright. She was not a threat. She was dying. "Christ," he muttered, setting down his bucket and sickle. His boots crunched through the frost-brittle grass as he walked toward her, keeping his hands visible and his movements slow. "Easy now. I'm not armed." The orc woman's yellow eyes tracked him with predatory focus, but she said nothing. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe 20 summers at most, with the small tusks and smooth skin of someone who had not yet seen many battles. Her black hair was matted with dirt and dried blood, hanging past her broad shoulders in tangled ropes. The wound in her side looked like a sword cut, deep enough to be serious but not immediately fatal if treated soon. "You understand me?" Quentin asked, stopping about 10 feet away. He knew some orcs spoke the common tongue, though many refused to on principle. "Yes." Her voice was rough, like gravel scraping against stone, but clear enough. "You will not help me. No human helps orcs. I came to your field because I could walk no further. I will die here or I will not. That is all." "That's a damned grim way to start a conversation," Quentin said, pulling off his work shirt so he stood in just his undershirt against the cold morning air. He wadded the fabric into a compress. "Hold this against the wound. Press hard. I need to get supplies from my house." She stared at him, unmoving, as though he had just spoken in a foreign language. "Why would you help me?" "Because you're bleeding to death in my wheat field, and I don't particularly want to spend my afternoon burying a body. Now press this against your side before you pass out." He stepped forward and held out the shirt. The orc woman took it with her free hand, her thick fingers surprisingly careful as they closed around the fabric. Their fingers brushed for just a moment, and Quentin felt the rough calluses of a warrior's palm against his own work-hardened skin. She held his gaze the entire time, those strange yellow eyes searching his face for any hint of deception or cruelty. He wondered what she saw there, just a 35-year-old farmer with sun-weathered skin and the first threads of gray in his brown hair, someone who had long ago traded his sword for a plow and preferred it that way. "I am called Gritha," she said quietly, pressing the shirt to her side. "Of the Ironwood clan. Though I am cast out now, so perhaps the name means nothing. Quentin Kershaw. This is my farm, such as it is. Can you walk to the house, or do I need to fetch a cart? I can walk." But when she took her first step, her legs buckled, and Quentin barely managed to catch her before she collapsed face first into the frost. She was heavy with muscle and dense bone, much heavier than a human woman her size would have been, and he grunted with effort as he shifted her weight against his shoulder. Right then, Cart it is. Just try not to die while I'm gone makes for poor hospitality. He eased her down onto the cold ground as gently as he could manage, then jogged back toward his barn. His mind raced as he hitched up his old draft horse and loaded a few blankets into the cart bed. This was insane. If anyone from the village found out he was harboring an orc, even a wounded one, there would be consequences. But he had already committed to helping her the moment he offered his shirt, and Quentin Kershaw was not the type of man to turn away from a choice once made. When he returned with the cart, Gritha had managed to prop herself up against a fence post, though her green skin had taken on a sickly gray pallor. She watched him approach with wary eyes, like a wild animal that had been cornered too many times to trust an offered hand. "Come on then," Quentin said, climbing down from the driver's seat. "Let's get you somewhere warm before you freeze as well as bleed." She did not protest when he lifted her into the cart bed, though he saw her jaw clench with pain as the movement jostled her wound. He piled the blankets over her body, hiding her nakedness and hopefully providing some warmth against the autumn chill. Then he drove the cart as carefully as possible across the bumpy field road toward his modest farmhouse, glancing back every few seconds to make sure she had not stopped breathing. His house was small but well-maintained, 2 rooms downstairs and a sleeping loft above, with a stone fireplace and shuttered windows that kept the worst of the weather out. He had built most of it himself over the 5 years since he bought this land, learning carpentry through trial and error and stubborn determination. It was not much, but it was his, and after years of sleeping in military camps and eating cold rations in muddy trenches, it felt like a palace. Quentin maneuvered the cart as close to the front door as possible, then half-carried, half-dragged Gritha inside and laid her on his own bed. She was shivering violently now, shock setting in from blood loss and exposure. He stoked the fire in the hearth until it roared with heat, then gathered his medical supplies: clean cloth, needle and thread, alcohol for sterilizing, and a leather strap for her to bite down on if the pain grew too intense. "This is going to hurt," he warned, kneeling beside the bed. "That wound needs to be cleaned and stitched closed. I have some poppy syrup that will help with the pain, but it will still be unpleasant." Gritha's yellow eyes met his, and for the first time since he found her, something like emotion flickered across her harsh features. Not gratitude exactly, but perhaps surprise that he was bothering to warn her at all. "Do what must be done. I have survived worse pain than this." Quentin nodded and set to work. He had sewn up dozens of wounds during his years as a field medic, but orc physiology was different enough from human that he had to adjust his technique. Their skin was thicker, tougher to pierce with a needle, and their blood clotted faster once the initial flow was staunched. The sword wound in her side had cut through muscle, but missed any vital organs whoever wielded the blade had been aiming to disable rather than kill outright. As he worked, cleaning away the crusted blood and foreign dirt before beginning the delicate process of stitching the wound closed, Gritha remained eerily still. She did not cry out or curse or even flinch when the needle pierced her flesh. She simply stared at the ceiling beams and breathed through her small tusks, her jaw set with warrior's discipline. "Who did this to you?" Quentin asked, partly to distract her and partly because he needed to know if armed orcs or human soldiers might come looking for her. "My own kin," Gritha said flatly. "I was to marry a warrior from another clan, an alliance union to strengthen our position against human encroachment, but I refused him. He was cruel, enjoyed causing pain to those weaker than himself. When I said I would not bond with such a male, the clan elders said I had shamed them. My own brother was ordered to execute me to restore the family honor." She paused, and Quentin saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. He could not bring himself to kill me outright, so he cut me and left me for the wilderness to finish. A mercy, I suppose, though it does not feel merciful. Jesus, Quentin muttered, pulling another stitch tight, and they call orcs the savage ones. That earned him a sharp glance from Gritha, something between surprise and suspicion. You do not think we are savages? I think every people has its share of decent folk and bastards, and the color of your skin doesn't determine which category you fall into. He tied off the final stitch and sat back, examining his work. The wound was closed, the bleeding stopped. She would need rest and food to recover, but she would live. There. Keep that clean and dry for the next few days. I will make a poultice to prevent infection. Gritha pushed herself up on her elbows, looking down at the neat line of stitches across her green skin. When she looked back up at Quentin, her expression was complex, layered with emotions he could not quite parse. Why are you doing this, truly? You could have let me die and no one would have faulted you for it. You could have killed me yourself and been praised as a hero. Yet you bring me into your home and tend my wounds like I am kin. I do not understand humans at all. Quentin stood and began cleaning his tools, keeping his hands busy so he would not have to meet those intense yellow eyes. During the war, I saw a lot of death. Human, orc, it all looked the same after a while, just bodies in the mud, all that life and potential snuffed out over land and pride and old grudges. I got tired of it. Tired of killing, tired of watching friends die, tired of pretending there was any glory in it. So when the territorial militia gave me an honorable discharge after I took an arrow to the leg, I bought this farm and decided I was done with death. Done contributing to it, done ignoring it when I could help. Maybe that makes me a fool, but I have had enough of being a practical man who sleeps poorly at night. He finally looked at her again, and found her staring at him with an expression he would have called wonder if he thought orcs capable of such a sentiment. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts, until Gritha finally lay back down with a wince. You are very strange, Quentin Kershaw, she said quietly, but I am grateful. I will rest now if that is acceptable. Rest as long as you need. I will bring you some food when you wake. He pulled a blanket over her body, more out of habit than modesty, since he had already seen everything while treating her wounds. And we should probably find you some clothes at some point. I might have an old shirt and trousers that could be altered to fit. Gritha's eyes were already drifting closed, exhaustion and pain finally claiming her now that she was somewhere safe and warm. Thank you, she murmured, so quietly he almost missed it. Quentin left her to sleep and went back outside to finish his morning chores, though his mind was not on the work. He milked his 2 cows and fed the chickens and checked the grain stores in his barn, all while wondering what in the hell he was going to do with an orc woman recovering in his bed. The smart thing would be to help her heal enough to travel, then send her on her way before anyone in the village noticed. The kind thing would be to let her stay as long as she needed, consequences be damned. He was still wrestling with the question when he came back inside around midday to find Gritha awake and sitting up in bed, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a cloak. She was looking around his house with undisguised curiosity, taking in the simple furniture and cooking implements and the few personal touches that marked it as a home rather than just a shelter. You live alone, she said. It was not a question. I do. Never found anyone who wanted to share a frontier farm with a washed-up soldier. Quentin busied himself at the hearth, ladling stew from the pot he kept perpetually simmering. You hungry? This is mostly vegetables and barley, but there is some salt pork in it for flavor. Yes, thank you. She accepted the bowl he handed her and ate with efficient grace. using the wooden spoon properly despite her thick fingers. Quentin tried not to stare as he ate his own portion, but it was difficult not to watch her. She was striking in a way that had nothing to do with conventional human beauty, all sharp angles and powerful lines, strength evident in every movement even while injured. "How long have you been farming here?" Gritha asked between bites. 5 years come spring. I bought the land cheap because no one else wanted to work this far from the village, too close to orc territory for comfort. He gave her a wry smile. Turns out they were right to be cautious. Gritha's expression darkened. I will leave as soon as I am able. I do not wish to bring trouble to your door. Where will you go? You said you were cast out from your clan. I do not know. Somewhere far from here where no one knows my shame. She set down the empty bowl, her hands clenching into fists against the blanket. I am clanless now, which means I am nothing. No orc will take me in, no clan will offer me sanctuary. I will have to make my way alone, or I will die trying. That is the fate I chose when I refused the marriage. Seems like a harsh punishment for not wanting to marry a bastard, Quentin observed. Among my people, the clan is everything. Individual desires are secondary to the needs of the group. By refusing the alliance, I put my own wants above the survival of my kin. They see that as the greatest betrayal. She looked down at her hands and her voice grew quieter. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps I am selfish and weak for not accepting my duty. Quentin leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Or perhaps your kin are wrong for trying to force you into a life of misery. Duty is one thing, but sacrificing your happiness to someone cruel is another. You have a right to choose your own path. Gritha looked at him with those strange yellow eyes, and Quentin saw something vulnerable beneath the warrior's mask she wore. You truly believe that individuals have the right to defy their people's traditions? I do. Hell, I am living proof of it. My father wanted me to take over his blacksmith shop in the capital, keep the family trade going for another generation. Instead, I joined the militia, served my time, and bought a farm in the middle of nowhere. He did not speak to me for 2 years, but I was happier out here than I ever would have been pounding horseshoes in a city forge. Sometimes you have to disappoint people to be true to yourself. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You are a strange human, Quentin Kershaw. But I think I understand you better now. They fell into a comfortable silence after that, and Quentin found himself oddly content to simply sit by the fire while Gritha rested. It had been a long time since he had shared his home with another person, and even longer since that person seemed to understand the choices he had made without judgment or pity. Over the next several days, a routine developed between them. Quentin would wake before dawn to tend his animals and work his fields, bringing in the last of the autumn harvest before the first snows came. Gritha would sleep late while her body healed, then spend the afternoon slowly moving around the house, testing her strength and flexibility as the wound knitted together. In the evenings, they would share a simple meal and talk tentative conversations at first, gradually becoming more comfortable as wariness gave way to genuine curiosity about each other's lives. Quentin learned that Gritha had been training as a scout for her clan, learning to move silently through forests and read the signs of weather and animal movement. She had hoped to become a ranger, one of the elite trackers who protected orc territory from human expansion. That dream had died when she refused the marriage, but she spoke of it with a wistfulness that made Quentin's chest ache. Gritha learned that Quentin had grown up in a crowded city, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had always felt suffocated by the press of people and buildings. The open frontier called to him even as a boy, and when he was old enough to leave, he went as far from civilization as his feet could carry him. The war had been brutal and demoralizing, but it taught him field medicine and survival skills that served him well as a farmer. On the fourth day, Quentin brought her one of his old work shirts and a pair of trousers, both much too large but serviceable once Gritha used her small belt knife to cut and tie them into something approximating a fit. She stood in the middle of his house wearing human clothes, looking simultaneously fierce and uncomfortable, and Quentin had to suppress a smile at the image. "They will suffice," Gritha said gruffly, tugging at the shirt hem. "Though human clothing is strange. Too much fabric in some places, not enough in others. You will get used to it, and it beats walking around naked, though I suppose that is a matter of personal preference." Quentin kept his tone light, but he felt his face heat slightly at the memory of that first morning, her green skin streaked with blood and her eyes challenging him to look away. Gritha caught his expression, and something like amusement flickered across her features. "Among orcs, nudity is not shameful unless done to humiliate. We bathed and trained unclothed in the common grounds. It is simply the body, nothing more." She paused, then added more quietly, "But I know humans view such things differently. I did not mean to make you uncomfortable that first day. I was simply too weak to care about modesty." "You did not make me uncomfortable," Quentin said, then wondered if that was entirely true. She had made him feel something that morning, standing bare and defiant in his field, not discomfort exactly, but an awareness that had nothing to do with medical necessity. He pushed the thought aside. "I was more concerned about keeping you alive than anything else, and you succeeded. The wound is healing well thanks to your skill." Gritha touched her side lightly, tracing the line of stitches through the fabric. "I am strong enough now to move on, to stop imposing on your hospitality." "You are not imposing," Quentin said, perhaps too quickly. "I mean, you are welcome to stay until you are fully healed. No sense rushing off before you are ready." Gritha studied him with that unnerving intensity she had, as though she could see straight through his skull into his thoughts. "You are lonely here, I think. You say you prefer the isolation, but I see how you linger over our conversations. How you find reasons to stay inside rather than working until dark as you did the first few days. You are not eager for me to leave." Quentin felt exposed, caught in a truth he had not quite admitted to himself. "Maybe I've gotten used to having someone to talk to. Is that so strange?" "No, it is not strange at all." Gritha moved to the window and looked out at the fields stretching toward the forest. "I am lonely too, if I am honest. I did not realize how much of my identity was tied to my clan until I lost it. Now I am adrift, with no purpose and no place to belong. Staying here, speaking with you each evening, it makes me feel less invisible, less like a ghost wandering between worlds." "Then stay," Quentin said. The words came out more earnest than he intended. "At least through the winter. You can help around the farm, earn your keep if that sits better with your pride. And when spring comes, if you still want to move on, I will help you provision for the journey." Gritha turned from the window, her yellow eyes searching his face. "You would do that? Let me stay for months, knowing the risk it poses to you. If your village learns you are sheltering an orc, they will name you traitor. They might burn your farm and drive you out, or worse." "Let me worry about the village. I keep to myself mostly, and they do not come this far out except for the quarterly tax collection. As long as you stay close to the house when strangers are around, no one needs to know." He met her gaze steadily. "I am making this offer because I want to, Gritha. Not out of pity or obligation. I would welcome the company and the help if you are willing to give it." She was quiet for a long time, emotions playing across her features too quickly for him to read. Then she crossed the room and extended her hand in the human style, offering a formal agreement. "I accept. I will stay through winter and help with your farm, and I will do my best to ensure my presence brings you no harm." Quentin took her hand, feeling the strength in her grip, the calluses that matched his own. "Then we have a deal." That handshake marked a shift in their dynamic. Gritha was no longer a patient recovering from injury, but a partner sharing the work of the farm. She proved to be a quick learner and tireless worker, her orc strength allowing her to accomplish tasks that would have taken Quentin twice as long. She could lift bales of hay that he had to drag, could split firewood with a few efficient swings of the axe, could haul water from the well without breaking a sweat. But she was also surprisingly gentle with the animals, speaking softly to the cows during milking and scattering feed for the chickens with patient care. Quentin caught her once sitting in the barn with his old tomcat curled in her lap, her thick fingers stroking the orange fur with unexpected tenderness. "I did not know orcs liked cats," he said from the doorway. Gritha looked up, unashamed to be caught in such a domestic moment. "We keep hunting cats in our settlements to control vermin. I had one when I was young, before I began warrior training. She was small and fierce and would fight creatures 3 times her size without hesitation. I admired that about her." She scratched behind the tomcat's ears and was rewarded with a rumbling purr. "This one reminds me of her, though he is much lazier." "That is Sergeant. He was a kitten when I moved here, half wild and living in the barn. Took me 6 months to earn his trust, but now he acts like he owns the place." Quentin sat down on a hay bale nearby, watching the unlikely pair. Never seen him take to someone so quickly, though. Usually he hisses at strangers. Perhaps he knows I am not truly a stranger. Animals can sense such things. Gritha smiled, a rare expression that softened her harsh features and made her look younger. Or perhaps he simply knows I will share my dinner scraps with him if he is charming enough. Quentin laughed, and the sound felt good, natural. He realized he had not laughed much since buying the farm, too focused on survival and solitude to find much humor in daily life. But Gritha's dry observations and occasional blunt commentary had a way of catching him off guard, pulling reluctant smiles and genuine amusement from him. As autumn deepened into early winter, they fell into a rhythm that felt startlingly domestic. They would work side by side during the day, breaking at midday to share a simple lunch, then returning to their tasks until dusk. Evenings were spent by the fire, mending clothes or sharpening tools while they talked about everything and nothing: childhood memories, favorite foods, philosophical questions about duty and freedom, and the nature of home. Quentin found himself looking forward to those evening conversations more than he cared to admit. Gritha had a sharp mind and was not afraid to challenge his assumptions or offer perspectives he had never considered. She was also willing to listen when he talked about his experiences in the war, the things he had seen and done that still haunted his dreams. She did not offer empty platitudes or false comfort, just steady presence and occasional insights from her own training as a warrior. One evening in late autumn, as the first snow began to fall outside, Gritha asked him about the scar on his left thigh, the one from the arrow that had ended his military service. "Does it still pain you?" she asked, watching him unconsciously rub at the old injury as he sat by the fire. "Sometimes, especially when the weather turns cold. Nothing I cannot manage, but it serves as a reminder." Quentin stretched his leg out, feeling the familiar tightness in the muscle. The arrow hit during a skirmish on the eastern border. "We were retreating from a failed ambush when I took it in the leg. Would have bled out if my squad leader had not tied it off and carried me back to camp. Spent 3 months recovering before the field surgeon declared me unfit for active duty." "You sound almost grateful for the injury," Gritha observed. "I am, in a way. It gave me an honorable way out of a life I no longer believed in. If I had not been wounded, I might have served another 5 years, killing and watching friends die, slowly losing whatever shreds of humanity I had left. The arrow saved me from that fate, even if it cost me the full use of my leg. He met her eyes across the firelight. Strange to be grateful for a wound, but there it is. Gritha nodded slowly. I understand. My own wound, the one my brother gave me, it freed me from a life I did not want. I would not have had the courage to leave the clan on my own, to face exile voluntarily. But once the choice was made for me, I could accept it, embrace it even. She touched her side where the scar was hidden beneath her borrowed shirt. So perhaps we are both grateful for the injuries that changed our paths, even if we would not have chosen them. Two broken people mending each other by accident, Quentin said with a soft smile. There is poetry in that, I suppose. There is truth in that, Gritha corrected. Poetry is just truth dressed in fancier words. The snow continued to fall outside, and Quentin realized with a start that he was content in a way he had not been in years. Not just resigned to his circumstances, or grimly determined to survive another season, but genuinely happy to be exactly where he was, doing exactly what he was doing. And that feeling had everything to do with the orc woman sitting across from him, her green skin painted gold by the firelight, her expression thoughtful and unguarded. It was a dangerous realization, he knew. Caring for her beyond simple friendship was a path fraught with complications he could barely imagine. But the heart did not much care about practicality or social consequences. It wanted what it wanted, consequences be damned. Winter deepened, and the snow piled high around the farmhouse, turning Quentin's land into a pristine white landscape, broken only by the dark lines of fence posts and the skeletal branches of trees. They settled into the quiet routine of winter farm work, feeding animals, hauling water, splitting endless cords of firewood to feed the hungry hearth. The isolation was total now, the road to the village impassable until the spring thaw, and Quentin found himself grateful for the enforced solitude that meant no one would stumble upon his unlikely household. Gritha proved to be invaluable during the harsh winter months. Her orc physiology meant she tolerated the cold better than Quentin, and she would venture out in weather that had him huddled by the fire. She had an uncanny ability to predict storms before they hit, reading signs in the wind and clouds that he could not perceive. More than once, her warning gave them time to secure the animals and stock extra wood before a blizzard struck. They also began training together in the afternoons, after the essential work was done. Gritha was restless without physical challenge, and she convinced Quentin to spar with her using wooden practice swords he carved from ash branches. She was faster and stronger than him, but he had technique and experience that occasionally allowed him to land a touch. More often, he ended up flat on his back in the snow, breathing hard while she stood over him with a satisfied expression. "You rely too much on your weapon," she told him after one particularly swift defeat. "You need to think of your whole body as a weapon. Use your weight, your momentum, not just the blade." "Easy for you to say," Quentin grumbled, accepting her hand up. "You are built like a brick wall. I have less mass to throw around." "Then use speed and cunning instead. You are clever, Quentin. Apply that cleverness to combat." She tossed him the practice sword again. "Once more. This time, stop thinking so much and trust your instincts." They went another round, and this time Quentin managed to slip past her guard and tap her ribs with the wooden blade. Gritha's eyes widened in genuine surprise, then she grinned, showing her small tusks. "Better, you are learning." She clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to make him stagger. "A few more months and you might actually be dangerous." "I will take that as high praise coming from you," Quentin said, grinning despite his exhaustion. He realized he was standing very close to her, close enough to see the faint pattern of darker green freckles across her nose, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her body in the cold air. His smile faded as awareness crashed over him, awareness of how often he found excuses to be near her, to touch her shoulder or hand in passing, to study the strong lines of her face when she was not looking. Gritha must have seen something in his expression, because her own smile faded too. For a moment, they simply stood there in the snowy yard, breathing hard, the practiced swords forgotten in their hands. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken thoughts and dangerous possibilities. Then Sergeant the Tomcat yowled from the barn, breaking the spell, and they both stepped back hastily. "I should check on the cows," Gritha said, her voice rougher than usual. "And I need to bring in more firewood," Quentin added, grateful for an excuse to put some distance between them and the moment that had just passed. They did not speak of it that evening, both of them carefully maintaining normal conversation as they ate dinner and tended to small tasks. But Quentin caught Gritha watching him more than once, her yellow eyes thoughtful, and he wondered if she felt the same pull he did, the growing attraction that had nothing to do with logic or reason, and everything to do with shared moments and genuine understanding. That night, lying in his bed in the loft while Gritha slept below by the fire, Quentin stared at the ceiling beams and forced himself to think through the reality of his feelings. He was attracted to an orc woman, to someone his people considered a monster or an enemy. If anyone learned about these feelings, he would be ostracized at best, possibly worse. And even if he acted on them, what future could they possibly have together? Where could they go where both humans and orcs would not revile them for breaking the most fundamental social taboo? But even as he catalogued all the practical reasons why he should suppress these feelings, his heart argued otherwise. Gritha was brave and honest and fiercely loyal. She was clever and funny in her blunt way. She understood him better than anyone ever had, saw through his defenses to the lonely man beneath without judging what she found there. Was he supposed to ignore all of that because her skin was green and she had small tusks? Was he supposed to let fear and prejudice dictate his heart? He did not have answers, only questions that kept him awake long into the cold night. The winter solstice came and went, and Quentin marked the occasion by roasting a chicken and baking bread with the last of his honey and dried fruit. It was meant to be a celebration of the year's turning, a promise that spring would eventually return. But as he and Gritha shared the meal, he found his thoughts turning melancholy. "What troubles you?" Gritha asked, setting down her fork. "You have been quiet all evening." "Just thinking about time passing," Quentin admitted. "We are past the solstice now, which means the days will start getting longer. Spring will come before we know it, and you said you would stay until spring." Understanding dawned in Gritha's eyes. "And then I said I would leave, yes." She was quiet for a moment, staring at her plate. "Does it bother you, the thought of me leaving?" "Yes," Quentin said simply. "It bothers me a great deal, if I am honest." "Why?" The question was not challenging but genuinely curious, as though she could not fathom why he would want her to stay. Quentin set down his own fork and met her gaze across the table. "Because I have come to value your presence here. Because this house feels like a home when you are in it, not just a place I sleep. Because I would miss you terribly if you left." He paused, then added more quietly, "Because I care for you, Gritha. More than I probably should, but there it is." Gritha's eyes widened slightly, genuine shock crossing her features. "You care for me? In what way do you mean this?" "In every way that matters," Quentin said, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "I think about you constantly. I look forward to seeing you each morning and dread the thought of a day when you will not be here. I find myself watching you when you work, admiring your strength and grace. And when you smile, which is rare enough, it feels like the sun breaking through clouds." He laughed softly, self-deprecating. "I know this is foolish and complicated and possibly insulting to you. I know I am just a human and you are an orc, and there are 1,000 reasons why anything between us is impossible. But you asked, so I am telling you the truth. I care for you deeply, and the thought of you leaving tears at me in ways I cannot quite articulate." The silence that followed was excruciating. Gritha stared at him with an expression he could not read, emotions flickering too quickly across her features to identify. Quentin braced himself for rejection, for anger, for awkward pity, any of the responses that seemed most likely. What he did not expect was for Gritha to push back from the table and cross to where he sat, then drop to her knees so they were at eye level. She took his face between her large hands, her palms warm and calloused against his skin, and held his gaze with an intensity that made his breath catch. "You foolish, wonderful man," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Do you truly not see? I have been fighting these same feelings since the first week I was here. I told myself it was just gratitude for saving my life, then companionship from shared isolation, then respect for your character. But the truth is simpler and more terrifying." She stroked her thumbs along his cheekbones, a gesture so tender it made his chest ache. "I care for you too, Quentin Kershaw. I think of you constantly, dream of you at night, find excuses to be near you during the day. When you laugh at something I said, I feel pride beyond reason. When you are hurt or tired, I want to ease your burdens. And the thought of leaving you in spring feels like tearing out my own heart." "Gritha," Quentin breathed, covering her hands with his own. "Why did you not say anything?" "For the same reasons you hesitated. Because it is impossible and foolish and dangerous for both of us. Because I am orc and you are human and our peoples hate each other. Because I have no right to ask you to care for someone like me, someone cast out and clanless. Because I am terrified of what could happen if we act on these feelings." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. "But I am more terrified of leaving and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have had if I were braver." Quentin leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "Then do not leave. Stay here with me, and we will figure out the rest together. I do not care if it is difficult or if people judge us. I care about you and I want to see where this could go. You are asking me to be your woman." Gritha's voice was barely a whisper. "To bond with you in the human way. I am asking you to stay and see what grows between us. If that leads to bonding, to marriage, then wonderful. If it leads somewhere else, some new thing that is neither human nor orc tradition but ours alone, that is fine too. I just know I do not want to lose you, Gritha. Not to obligation or fear or the weight of tradition." She pulled back just enough to study his face, searching for any hint of doubt or insincerity. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "Then I will stay. Not just through spring, but as long as you will have me, and we will face whatever comes together." Quentin smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months, perhaps years. Together sounds perfect. They sealed the agreement with their first kiss, tentative and careful, learning the shape and taste of each other. Her tusks made the angle slightly awkward, but they adjusted, and when they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and smiling like fools. The rest of the winter passed in a haze of discovery and deepening connection. They were careful not to rush things physically, both aware that their relationship was crossing boundaries that neither culture would approve. But they talked endlessly, learning each other's fears and dreams and the small details that made them individuals rather than representatives of their respective peoples. Quentin learned that Gritha loved the sound of rain on the roof and the smell of fresh bread baking. That she was afraid of deep water because she had nearly drowned as a child. That she had always wanted to see the ocean, though it was weeks of travel from Orc lands. That her favorite color was the deep purple of twilight, and she hummed while she worked, tuneless but content. Gritha learned that Quentin had wanted to be a scholar before his father pushed him toward practical trades. That he could read and write, unusual for a frontier farmer, and owned a small collection of books he treasured. That he was afraid of fire after seeing a friend burned alive during the war. That he sometimes woke from nightmares sweating and shaking, and the best thing she could do was hold him until the memories faded. They began sharing the bed in the loft, at first just sleeping beside each other for warmth and comfort, then gradually becoming more intimate as trust deepened. Their first night of true intimacy was awkward and tender, and occasionally funny as they navigated the physical differences between their bodies. But they learned, and what they built together in the quiet privacy of winter nights was entirely their own, not human, not orc, but something new and precious. One night in late winter, as they lay tangled together beneath heavy quilts, Gritha traced idle patterns on Quentin's chest and asked, "What will we do when spring comes? When the roads clear and people from the village might travel this far again?" Quentin had been dreading this conversation, but he knew it was necessary. "We have a few choices. We could try to hide your presence, keep you out of sight when anyone visits. That might work for a while, but eventually someone will learn the truth. Or we could be open about our relationship, face the consequences head on. That would likely mean losing the farm, possibly facing violence from those who see our bond as unnatural. Or we could leave together, find somewhere remote enough that no one cares what we are." "Those are not pleasant options," Gritha said quietly. "No, they are not. But I have been thinking, and I believe honesty might be our best path forward. Not announcing our relationship to the village immediately, but not hiding it either. We could introduce you as a farmhand I hired, let people get used to seeing an orc working peacefully among humans. Then, over time, as they see you are not a threat, we could be more open about the depth of our connection." He stroked her hair, feeling the coarse texture so different from human. "It would be slow and risky, but it might give us a chance to change some minds rather than just running away." "You would risk your standing in the community for me?" Gritha asked, turning to look up at him. "You would endure their judgment and possible violence to keep me by your side?" "Yes," Quentin said simply. "You are worth any risk, any hardship. I decided that weeks ago." Gritha kissed him then, fierce and claiming, and he felt the depth of her emotion in every touch. When they finally broke apart, she was crying, tears streaming down her green cheeks. "I have never been worth that to anyone," she whispered. "My own clan cast me out for refusing one man, but you would stand against your entire village for me. How can I possibly deserve such devotion?" "You deserve it simply by being yourself," Quentin said, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "Fierce and kind and brave and honest. You deserve to be loved without conditions, Gritha, and I am going to spend the rest of my days proving that to you if you will let me." "Yes," she said, laughing through the tears. "Yes, I will let you. And I will spend my days proving myself worthy of that love." "You already are," Quentin assured her. "You already are." Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in stages, the frozen ground softening to mud, the first green shoots pushing through the soil with determined optimism. Quentin and Gritha worked together to prepare the fields for planting, spreading manure and turning the soil, repairing fences damaged by winter storms. It was hard work, but satisfying, made better by the constant companionship and the small touches they exchanged throughout the day, a hand on a shoulder, a smile across the field, a shared lunch break sitting close together in the spring sunshine. The first test of their plan came in early spring when a traveling merchant stopped at the farm, hoping to sell seed and tools. Quentin introduced Gritha as his hired hand, keeping his tone casual and matter-of-fact. The merchant, a grizzled man named Porter, stared at Gritha with undisguised suspicion. "You hired an orc," Porter said, his hand drifting toward the knife at his belt. "Are you mad, Kershaw? Those creatures cannot be trusted. She will slit your throat in the night and steal everything you own." "She has been working here all winter without incident," Quentin said calmly. "In fact, she is the best farmhand I have ever had. Strong, reliable, and knows more about weather prediction than anyone I have met." Porter looked unconvinced, his eyes darting between them. "Still seems foolish to me." "Mark my words, you will regret this decision. Orcs are savages, all of them." "Then it is fortunate this is my farm and my decision to make," Quentin said, his voice hardening slightly. "Now, are you here to sell supplies or to offer unsolicited opinions on my hiring practices?" The merchant completed his business quickly after that, though he shot dark looks at Gritha the entire time. When he finally left, driving his cart back toward the village, Quentin let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "That went about as well as could be expected," he said wryly. "He will tell everyone in the village that you are sheltering an orc," Gritha said, her expression troubled. "They will come to investigate, to demand explanations." "Let them come. We have nothing to hide. You work here legitimately, you have done nothing wrong. If they have a problem with that, they can take it up with me." Quentin took her hand, squeezing gently. "We knew this would be difficult, but we face it together, remember?" Gritha squeezed back, drawing strength from his touch. "Together. Yes, I remember." The village response came 3 days later in the form of the territorial magistrate and 4 armed guards. They rode up to the farmhouse at midday, when Quentin and Gritha were planting the first of the spring wheat. Quentin recognized the magistrate as Reynard Porter, an older man who had always been fair in his tax assessments and judgments. He hoped that fairness would extend to this situation. "Quentin Kershaw," Magistrate Porter called out, reining in his horse. "I have heard troubling reports that you are harboring an orc on your property. I need to see for myself if this is true." "It is true," Quentin said, brushing dirt from his hands as he walked toward the magistrate. "This is Gritha. She works for me as a farmhand and has done so since autumn. She is no threat to anyone." The magistrate studied Gritha with a critical eye, taking in her work clothes and the agricultural tools in her hands. "An orc working peacefully on a human farm. I admit, I did not believe it when I heard the report. How did this arrangement come about?" Quentin had prepared this story carefully, sticking as close to the truth as possible while omitting the romantic elements. "I found her wounded in my field last autumn, nearly dead from blood loss. I treated her wounds because it was the decent thing to do, and when she recovered, she offered to work in exchange for shelter through the winter. She has been invaluable in helping maintain the farm, and I have no complaints about her character or conduct." "You should have reported finding an orc to the authorities immediately," one of the guards said, his hand on his sword hilt. "They are dangerous, unpredictable. She could have killed you at any time." "She had ample opportunity to do so if that was her intent," Quentin pointed out. "Instead, she has worked hard, caused no trouble, and helped me bring in the best harvest I have had in years. I see no reason to treat her as a threat when her actions have been nothing but peaceful." The magistrate was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving between Quentin and Gritha. Finally, he said, "This is highly irregular, Kershaw. There are no laws specifically forbidding what you have done, but there are plenty of people in the village who will not be comfortable with an orc living so close to their homes." If there is any incident, any complaint at all, I will have no choice but to order her removed from human lands. Do you understand? I understand, Quentin said. And I will take full responsibility for her actions. But I promise you, there will be no incidents. Gritha just wants to live peacefully, same as any of us. The magistrate looked at Gritha directly for the first time. Is this true? You wish to live peacefully among humans? Gritha met his gaze steadily, her voice clear and firm. I was cast out from my clan for refusing an alliance marriage. I have nowhere else to go, no people to call my own. Quentin offered me shelter and work, and I am grateful for both. I have no desire to cause trouble for him or for your village. I only wish to live quietly and earn my place through honest labor. The magistrate nodded slowly. Very well. I will allow this arrangement to continue provisionally. But understand that you are under scrutiny, both of you. Any hint of wrongdoing and I will not hesitate to act. Am I clear? Perfectly clear, Quentin said. Thank you for your fairness, Magistrate Porter. The magistrate and his guards rode away, leaving Quentin and Gritha standing in the half-planted field. Gritha let out a shaky breath, her shoulders dropping from their tense posture. That could have gone much worse, she said. It could have, but it did not. We cleared the first hurdle. Quentin pulled her into a brief embrace, not caring if the departing guards saw. We will face whatever comes next the same way together and honestly. The weeks that followed were tense but gradually improved. Word spread through the village about the orc working at the Kershaw farm, and reactions were mixed. Some people condemned Quentin as a fool or worse, refusing to trade with him or acknowledge him when he came to the village for supplies. Others were cautiously curious, and a few brave souls even stopped by the farm to see for themselves what an orc farmhand looked like. One such visitor was an elderly widow named Marta Hollies, who lived on the neighboring property about a mile south. She arrived one afternoon with a basket of early vegetables and a shrewd, measuring look in her eyes. "So you are the orc everyone is talking about," she said to Gritha without preamble. "You look less fearsome than the stories suggest." Gritha blinked, clearly unsure how to respond to the blunt assessment. "I am just a person, same as you. I work, I eat, I sleep. Nothing fearsome about that." Marta studied her a moment longer, then nodded as though coming to a decision. "I am too old to care much about politics or prejudice, and I judge people by their actions rather than their appearance. Quentin is a good man, and if he trusts you, that is good enough for me. If you two ever need anything, you let me know. And if anyone from the village gives you trouble, you send them to me. I have known most of them since they were in diapers, and they will listen when I tell them to stop being fools." "Thank you," Quentin said, genuinely touched by the offer. "That means a great deal, Marta." "Just being neighborly," Marta said with a dismissive wave. "Now I brought these vegetables, and I expect you to use them properly. None of this bachelor cooking nonsense, Quentin. A good stew will do you both some good." She left as abruptly as she had arrived, and Quentin and Gritha looked at each other in bemusement. "I like her," Gritha said. "She is fierce in a way that has nothing to do with physical strength." "She is something, all right," Quentin agreed, smiling. "And she is right about the stew. We should make some tonight." As spring deepened into early summer, more of the villagers warmed to Gritha's presence, if not universally accepting then at least tolerant. She helped Marta repair her fence after a storm, worked alongside Quentin to help a neighbor whose husband had broken his leg, and even assisted the village healer in gathering medicinal herbs from the forest. Each act of kindness and competence chipped away at the prejudice, proving through actions that she was no threat. But there were still those who saw her as an abomination, a monster who had no place among civilized people. One night in midsummer, someone set fire to Quentin's wheat field, destroying weeks of work and threatening to spread to the house. Quentin and Gritha barely managed to contain the blaze, working through the night to dig fire breaks and beat out the flames with wet blankets. When dawn came and they stood exhausted in the charred remains of the field, Quentin felt despair threatening to overwhelm him. So much work, so much hope, turned to ash by someone's hatred. "I am sorry," Gritha said, her voice raw with emotion. "This is because of me. If I were not here, no one would have targeted you like this." "No," Quentin said firmly, taking her soot-stained face in his hands. "This is because some people are cruel and small-minded, not because you did anything wrong, and we will recover from this. We will replant, we will rebuild, and we will not let fear drive us apart. Do you hear me?" Gritha nodded, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her cheeks. "I hear you. Together we will face this." "Together," Quentin agreed. The magistrate investigated the arson and eventually identified the culprit, a young hothead named Derek Walsh, who had been vocal in his opposition to Gritha's presence. He was fined heavily and ordered to provide labor to help replant the wheat field, a punishment that felt inadequate but was better than nothing. More importantly, the arson backfired in terms of public opinion. Many villagers who had been neutral or mildly opposed to Gritha were horrified by the destruction, and several came forward to offer assistance with the replanting. Marta Hollies organized a work party, and over the course of 3 days, neighbors Quentin barely knew came to help restore the field. They worked alongside Gritha, seeing her strength and dedication firsthand, and by the end, more than a few had shifted their opinions about the orc woman living among them. One evening after the replanting was complete, Quentin and Gritha sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The new wheat was just beginning to sprout, tiny green shoots pushing through the dark soil with stubborn determination. "We are going to make it," Quentin said, taking Gritha's hand. "I can feel it. The worst is behind us, and now we can start building a real life together." "I hope you are right," Gritha said, "but even if more hardships come, I will face them gladly as long as I face them with you." Quentin lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that had become familiar between them. "I love you, Gritha. I know I have not said it explicitly before, but I do. I love you with everything I am." Gritha turned to him, her yellow eyes bright with emotion. "And I love you, Quentin Kershaw. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my days proving myself worthy of that love." "You already have," Quentin said, pulling her close. "You already have." As summer progressed into harvest season, Quentin began making plans for a formal hand-fasting ceremony. It would not be a traditional human wedding, as no priest would agree to officiate a union between human and orc. Nor would it follow orc bonding customs, as they had no clan elders to bless the match. Instead, Quentin envisioned something new, a ceremony that honored both their backgrounds while forging something entirely their own. He discussed the idea with Gritha one evening as they worked together in the garden, pulling weeds and checking the progress of the vegetables. "I want to make a formal commitment to you," he said, keeping his voice casual even though his heart was pounding. "Not just living together or sharing a bed, but a true bonding that everyone can see and recognize. I know it will not be legal in the traditional sense, but it will be real to us, and that is what matters." Gritha straightened from her weeding, her eyes wide. "You want to bond with me, truly?" "Despite everything it will cost you." "It will not cost me anything that matters," Quentin said. "And it will give me everything I want, a life with you, openly and without shame. So yes, I want to bond with you if you will have me." Gritha dropped her gardening tools and crossed to him, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "Yes. Yes, I will bond with you. I will stand before whatever witnesses you wish and pledge myself to you for all my days. You are my heart, Quentin. I want the world to know it." They planned the ceremony for the autumn equinox, the same time of year that Quentin had first found Gritha bleeding in his field. It seemed fitting to mark the anniversary of their meeting with the formalization of their bond. They invited everyone from the village, knowing many would not come but wanting to extend the offer regardless. They asked Magistrate Porter to officiate, as the closest thing they had to a neutral authority figure, and to their surprise he agreed. "I may not fully understand your choice," the magistrate said when they made the request, "but I cannot deny that the two of you have conducted yourselves with integrity and courage. If you wish to formalize your bond, I will do what I can to give it weight and legitimacy." The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. They held it at the farm, in the yard between the house and the rebuilt wheat field. Marta and a handful of other neighbors attended, along with the magistrate and his wife. Gritha wore a dress that Marta had helped her sew, simple green fabric that complemented her skin, and made her look both beautiful and powerful. Quentin wore his best clothes, a clean shirt and trousers that he normally reserved for trips to the village. Magistrate Porter spoke briefly about the nature of commitment and partnership, about choosing to build a life with another person, despite obstacles and opposition. Then he asked Quentin and Gritha to speak their own vows, the words coming from their hearts rather than any traditional script. Quentin went first, taking both of Gritha's hands in his. "Gritha, when I found you in my field a year ago, I never imagined that saving your life would mean saving my own. But that is what you have done. You have shown me what it means to be brave, to be honest, to be true to yourself even when the world demands otherwise. You have taught me that home is not a place but a person, and you are my home now. I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes, to honor your strength while cherishing your gentleness, to build with you a life that is entirely our own. I love you, and I choose you, today and every day after." Gritha's eyes were bright with tears as she spoke her own vows. "Quentin, you gave me back my life when you refused to let me die in your field. But more than that, you gave me hope, purpose, and love beyond anything I had ever known. You looked at me, truly looked, and saw a person rather than a monster. You challenged everything I believed about humans and about my own worth. I promise to stand with you, to work beside you, to face whatever judgments or hardships come our way with courage and honesty. You are my heart, my home, my chosen family. I love you, and I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice in keeping me." The magistrate declared them bonded in the eyes of those present, and in the sight of any gods who cared to witness. It was not a legal marriage, not recognized by the territorial authorities or any religious body. But it was real to them, and to the small group of people who had gathered to celebrate with them, and that was enough. They celebrated with a feast that Marta had helped prepare, simple food made extraordinary by the joy of the occasion. People told stories and offered toasts, and by the end of the evening, even some of the more skeptical attendees seemed moved by the obvious devotion between Quentin and Gritha. When the last guest had gone and the sun had fully set, Quentin and Gritha stood together in their yard, looking up at the stars scattered across the autumn sky. "We did it," Gritha said, leaning her head on Quentin's shoulder. "We are bonded. Officially, legally or not, we are one." "We are," Quentin agreed, wrapping his arm around her waist. "And nothing that comes after this will be as hard as getting here. We have faced down prejudice, violence, and isolation. We have built something precious from nothing. Whatever challenges remain, we will face them the way we always have together. Together, Gritha echoed and kissed him under the stars, sealing their bond with love and hope and stubborn determination. The years that followed were not without difficulty, but they were good years. The farm prospered under their joint efforts, becoming known throughout the region for the quality of its grain and vegetables. Gritha's reputation grew as well, transforming from that orc at the Kershaw farm to simply Gritha, the woman who could predict weather and grow anything in soil others called barren. She became an unofficial consultant for other farmers, offering advice on crop rotation and soil management. And though some still refused to speak to her, many came to value her expertise. Quentin and Gritha became a fixture in the community, their bond normalized through sheer persistence and daily presence. They were invited to harvest festivals and community meetings. They helped with barn raisings and attended weddings. They were not universally accepted, but they carved out a place for themselves through hard work and undeniable decency. 3 years after their bonding ceremony, Gritha approached Quentin with news that made his heart nearly stop. They were standing in the barn, doing the evening milking when she said in a carefully casual tone, "I am with child. The healer confirmed it yesterday when I went to the village for supplies." Quentin froze, the milk pail clattering from his hands. "You are, we are," he could not seem to form a complete sentence, joy and terror warring in his chest. "Yes," Gritha said, a smile spreading across her face. "We are going to have a child, half human, half orc, and entirely ours. I know this was not planned, and I know it will bring new complications," but Quentin cut her off by pulling her into his arms, holding her as tightly as he dared given her condition. "It is perfect. You are perfect. This is the best news I have ever received." He pulled back to look at her face, seeing his own joy reflected in her eyes. "We are going to be parents. Good gods, I have no idea what I am doing, but we will figure it out together." "Together," Gritha agreed, laughing through happy tears. "Always together." Their daughter was born in early spring, with Marta assisting as midwife since no official healer would attend the birth of a half-orc child. The labor was long and difficult, and Quentin spent most of it pacing outside the bedroom, listening to Gritha's occasional grunts of pain and Marta's calm instructions. When he finally heard the thin, warbling cry of a newborn, he nearly collapsed with relief. Marta emerged from the bedroom with a bundle wrapped in clean cloth, her weathered face split with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Quentin. You have a daughter, and she is perfect." Quentin took the bundle with trembling hands and looked down at his child for the first time. She was small, much smaller than he expected, with skin that was a pale greenish tone halfway between his and Gritha's. She had tiny tusks, barely visible bumps on her lower jaw, and pointed ears like her mother. Her eyes, when they blinked open, were a striking mix of green and hazel, entirely unique. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Can I see her?" Gritha called weakly from the bedroom, and Quentin hurried inside to find her propped up against pillows, exhausted but glowing with joy. He carefully placed their daughter in Gritha's arms, then sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around his wife and the other hand resting on his child's tiny chest. They stayed like that for a long time, a family complete and perfect in that moment. "What should we name her?" Gritha asked eventually, her voice soft with wonder. Quentin thought about it, about this child who represented so much hope and defiance and love. "How about Kira? It was my grandmother's name, and it means light in the old language. She is our light, proof that love can bridge any divide." "Kira," Gritha repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect. Kira Kershaw, our light and our future." Little Kira grew quickly, displaying traits from both her parents in fascinating combinations. She had her mother's strength and her father's curiosity. Gritha's directness, and Quentin's love of learning. By the time she was 3 years old, she was helping on the farm in small ways, feeding the chickens and gathering eggs with fierce concentration. The villagers' reactions to Kira were mixed, as expected. Some saw her as an abomination, proof that Quentin and Gritha's union was unnatural. But others saw a child, just a child who laughed and played and needed love like any human child. Marta absolutely doted on her, declaring herself honorary grandmother and spoiling Kira with treats and toys whenever she visited. As Kira grew, Quentin and Gritha made sure she understood both sides of her heritage. They taught her about human customs and holidays, but also about orc traditions and values as much as Gritha remembered them. They wanted her to be proud of what she was: not human, not orc, but something entirely new and valuable. One evening when Kira was 5 years old, she came to her parents with a question that had clearly been troubling her. "Why do some people in the village call me names? What is a half-breed?" Quentin and Gritha exchanged a look, both of them feeling the pain of knowing their daughter had encountered prejudice. Quentin knelt down to Kira's eye level, taking her small hands in his. "Some people are afraid of things that are different from them," he explained gently. "You are special, Kira. You have the best parts of both your mother's people and mine. But people who do not understand that might say unkind things. That does not mean what they say is true. You are perfect exactly as you are." "Your father is right," Gritha added, sitting beside them. "You are not half of anything. You are wholly yourself, completely Kira. And anyone who cannot see how wonderful that is does not deserve your attention or your tears." Kira nodded slowly, processing this information. Then she said with the blunt honesty of childhood, "I like being me. I am strong like Mama and smart like Papa. That is better than being just one thing." Quentin laughed and pulled her into a hug. "That is exactly right, sweetheart. You are the best of both of us, and we could not be more proud." The years continued to pass, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. The farm thrived, becoming prosperous enough that Quentin and Gritha were able to hire additional help during harvest season. Kira grew into a strong, confident girl who moved easily between the human and natural worlds, comfortable in both even as she belonged fully to neither. When Kira was 10, something remarkable happened. 3 young orcs appeared at the farm one autumn morning, travel-worn and cautious. They were siblings, cast out from their clan for various perceived infractions, and they had heard rumors of a place where a clanless orc lived in peace among humans. Gritha welcomed them warily at first, remembering her own desperate arrival years before. But as she talked with them and heard their stories, she felt a sense of purpose crystallizing. These young orcs needed what she and Quentin had built: a place of refuge and acceptance, somewhere to belong when their own people rejected them. That evening, she discussed the idea with Quentin. "What if we offered them shelter? Not just for a night or a week, but truly welcomed them to stay and work the farm with us. We have the land and we could use the help, and they have nowhere else to go." Quentin considered it, thinking about the implications and possibilities. "We would be creating something unprecedented: a community of mixed peoples, humans and orcs living and working together as equals. The village might riot. The territorial authorities might intervene. It could destroy everything we have built. Or it could be the beginning of something better," Gritha said. "A proof that our peoples do not have to be enemies, that there is another way forward. Kira should not have to grow up as the only one of her kind. There should be others, a community that accepts mixed families and clanless orcs and humans who dare to love across boundaries." Quentin thought about his daughter, about the world he wanted her to inherit. A world that was small and fearful, or one that was expanding to embrace new possibilities. The choice seemed obvious when framed that way. "All right," he said. "Let us do it. Let us build something bigger than just our family, a community of outcasts and rebels, proving that a different way is possible." They offered the 3 young orcs whose names were Durga, Thrak, and Mira a place on the farm, helping them build a small cabin at the edge of the property. The orcs worked hard, grateful for the acceptance and safety, and proved to be valuable additions to the farm's labor force. Word spread, both among humans and orcs, of this strange place where the boundaries between peoples blurred. Over the next few years, more arrived. A human woman fleeing an abusive husband. A family of orcs whose child had been born weak and was deemed unworthy by their clan. 2 human men who had bonded with each other and faced persecution in their village. An elderly orc warrior who had lost his clan to a plague and had nowhere else to die in peace. Each found refuge at the Kershaw farm, and each contributed to the growing community in their own way. The village response was predictably mixed. Some saw it as a dangerous experiment that would end in violence. Others were cautiously supportive, recognizing that Quentin and Gritha had created something unprecedented, a functioning mixed community that challenged every assumption about the impossibility of peace between humans and orcs. The territorial authorities investigated several times, but could find no laws being broken. Everyone living at the farm was there voluntarily, contributing to a productive agricultural operation. There was no violence, no theft, no disorder. Just people working together to survive and thrive in a world that had rejected them. On Kira's 15th birthday, the community numbered nearly 20 people, humans, orcs, and 3 other children of mixed heritage. They gathered for a celebration in the main yard, sharing food and stories and laughter under the stars. Quentin looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight and felt something settle in his chest, a deep sense of rightness and purpose. Gritha found him standing apart from the group, watching with a soft smile on his weathered face. She slipped her hand into his, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I never imagined this when I found you dying in my field all those years ago," Quentin said. "I thought I was just saving one life. I did not realize I was starting a revolution." "It is not a revolution," Gritha said. "It is just people choosing to be kind, to be brave, to build something better than what we inherited. You gave me a chance when no one else would. We gave others that same chance, and look what grew from those simple acts of compassion." "A community," Quentin said. "A family. A proof that the old ways do not have to define us forever." "Exactly." Gritha leaned her head on his shoulder and they stood together watching their extended family celebrate. "We did good, Quentin. Whatever else happens, we did something that mattered." "We did," he agreed. "And we are not done yet. There are more people out there who need what we have built. More families who deserve a chance to exist without shame or fear. This is just the beginning." Kira joined them, now nearly as tall as her mother and carrying herself with a confidence that made Quentin's heart swell with pride. "Papa, Mama, they are asking for a story. Will you tell them how you met? Please?" Quentin and Gritha looked at each other and smiled. They had told the story many times over the years, but it never grew old. It was their origin story, the foundation of everything that came after. "All right," Gritha said, taking her daughter's hand. "But you have to help us tell it. You are part of this story too, even if you came later." They returned to the fire circle, and Quentin began speaking, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "It started on a cold autumn morning when I walked out to my field and found an orc woman standing at the edge, naked and bleeding, daring me with her eyes to look away." As he spoke, weaving the familiar narrative of their first meeting and everything that followed, Quentin felt Gritha's hand in his and saw the faces of their community, human and orc, young and old, all of them listening raptly to a story of hope and defiance and love that conquered prejudice. This was his legacy, he realized. Not the farm or the crops or the buildings, but this collection of souls who had found each other in the margins and built something beautiful from their shared rejection. They had created a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where love was defined by choice and commitment rather than tradition or biology. Kira squeezed between her parents, wrapping an arm around each of them, and Quentin felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to his eyes. He had found his home all those years ago when he looked into a dying orc woman's eyes and chose compassion over fear. Everything else, the love, the family, the community, had grown from that single choice. And that, Quentin concluded his tale, is how your mother and I started our life together. One choice, one act of kindness, and everything changed. "Tell us what happened next," one of the younger children called out. "Tell us about when Kira was born." Gritha laughed and picked up the narrative, her voice warm and strong in the firelit darkness. Quentin listened to his wife tell their daughter's birth story, surrounded by the people who had become their chosen family, and felt a peace that went bone deep. They had faced hatred and violence and endless prejudice. They had lost crops and income, and the approval of those who should have supported them. But they had gained something infinitely more valuable, a life built on love and principle, a family that chose each other every day, and proof that the world could be better if people were willing to be brave. As the celebration continued into the night, with stories and songs and the simple joy of community, Quentin pulled Gritha close and whispered in her ear, "Thank you for not looking away that morning. Thank you for holding my gaze and daring me to be better than I was." Gritha turned to face him, her yellow eyes bright with love and firelight. "Thank you for seeing me as a person rather than a monster, for choosing compassion when fear would have been easier. You changed my life, Quentin Kershaw. You gave me a future when I had none." "We gave each other a future," Quentin corrected. "And we are going to spend the rest of our days making sure others have the same chance we did." They sealed the promise with a kiss, soft and familiar, and full of years of shared history. Around them, their community continued to celebrate, a living testament to the power of love and acceptance, and the radical choice to build bridges instead of walls. Years later, when historians would write about the integration of human and orc populations in the frontier territories, they would point to the Kershaw farm as the beginning, the first successful mixed community that proved peaceful coexistence was possible. They would study the careful diplomacy and community organizing that made it work, the legal precedents that were set, the social changes that rippled outward from that small farm. But for Quentin and Gritha, it was never about making history or changing the world. It was simply about loving each other and extending that love to others who needed it. It was about choosing compassion over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair. It was about one orc woman who bared herself completely in a field at dawn and held a human man's gaze, daring him to look away. And it was about that man choosing to look closer instead, to see the person behind the prejudice, and to build a life on that foundation of radical acceptance. They grew old together on that farm, watching their daughter grow into a leader who would champion mixed communities across the territories. They saw their family expand to include grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. They witnessed the gradual softening of attitudes between humans and orcs, as more brave souls followed their example and chose love over tradition. And through it all, through every triumph and setback, every joy and sorrow, they faced it together, two people who should never have met, who should never have loved, who should never have built the life they did. But they dared to imagine something different, something better, and they made it real through sheer stubborn determination and unwavering commitment to each other. On Quentin's 70th birthday, as he and Gritha sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, she asked him if he had any regrets about the path they had chosen. "Not a single one," he said without hesitation. "Every hardship was worth it. Every sacrifice bought us something precious. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, as long as I got to do it with you." Gritha smiled, that rare, full smile that still made his heart skip after all these years. "Good, because I feel exactly the same way. You are my greatest adventure, Quentin Kershaw, the best choice I ever made." "We made each other," Quentin said, taking her weathered hand in his. "Two broken people who found each other and chose to build something beautiful from the wreckage. That is what I want people to remember, not that we were different species or that we broke taboos, but that we loved each other and that love created something lasting and good." "They will remember," Gritha assured him. "How could they forget? We changed the world, you and I. One stubborn choice at a time." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting their farm in shades of gold and purple, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a legacy of love that would outlast them both. And in the distance, in the fields and buildings they had raised together, their community lived and worked and loved, proof that their impossible dream had become beautifully, permanently real. The story of how an orc woman stood naked and bleeding in a farmer's field and held his gaze, daring him to look away, had become legend. But the greater story of everything that grew from that single moment of connection was still being written by the lives they touched, the prejudices they shattered, and the hope they gave to everyone who came after, searching for a place where they too could belong without shame or fear. That story would continue long after they were gone, a testament to the revolutionary power of simply choosing to see the humanity in someone the world called a monster, and loving them anyway.